Many years before the attack on Pearl Harbor, officers of the Japanese Navy drew up their first operations plan to destroy the American fleet in the Pacific. It was based on the latest technology and the best military advice available. When it was finished, the plan became a cornerstone of Japanese defense policy. The date was August the 15th, 1907.
The greatest double cross in history. Jap envoys talk peace in Washington. Jap planes without warning bring war to America. Our great Pacific outpost in the Hawaiian Islands is ruthlessly bombed as Japan's perfidious declaration of war. Death and destruction unleashed on a nation at peace. Our battle cry is, remember Pearl Harbor.
That is how Pearl Harbor is remembered to this day. In an unprovoked attack without prior declaration of war, Japanese naval bombers killed 2,403 unsuspecting Americans and knocked out the United States Pacific Fleet. To Americans, it was an act of simple treachery. But history is usually written by the winners, and some contemporary Japanese historians see their country as a victim.
When you look at it from the Japanese point of view and take into account the Japanese state papers and documents, as well as the testimonies of survivors, I don't see that Japan really wanted to start the war against America. I think war broke out because there was a strong desire on the American side to force Japan into war. That desire came from the top.
In Japanese eyes, America and the British Empire were major obstacles to Japan's territorial ambitions. Most of these were directed at the mainland of Asia, at China, where Japan had been at war since 1931. The roots of Japan's conflict with her neighbors go back to the 19th century, for Japan's road to war was also her struggle to come to terms with the ways of the West. Until the 1850s, the Japanese had lived in deliberate isolation. Their history and their culture were their own. Their emperors came from the oldest ruling house in the world. It was the intrusion of foreign traders and the fear of colonization by the West that compelled them to modernize. Japan adopted a parliament, a penal code, and even a peerage, as in Britain. She also acquired an ambition to become, like her mentors in the West, an imperial power.
It was Britain that Japan took as her guide. In 1902, they entered into the Anglo-Japanese Treaty. Japan was quite convinced that she would not make any mistakes as long as she followed the British example in diplomacy. All the Western powers had followed Britain in developing their international relationships to suit their own convenience. They all went about securing their own colonies and ruled over them. Japan came on the scene rather late in the day, but she followed the rules in a most exemplary fashion.
Early in the century, Japan already held a substantial presence on the mainland of Asia. Korea was a protectorate. Further north, Japan held extensive rights in South Manchuria and neighboring provinces. In all, Japan's empire stretched from Taiwan in the south to Sakhalin in the north. With an eye to further expansion, her naval and military leaders identified the powers they thought most likely to block her supremacy in Asia.
The first imperial defense policy was drawn up in 1907. There, a hypothetical enemy was actually decided upon. The army would be at war with Russia and the navy with America. Thereafter, all drills and military exercises were carried out with this in mind. Since these two countries were depicted as Japan's potential enemy over a long period, the idea gradually arose among the young officers that it was Japan's fate to go to war with both of these countries. I think it was inevitable.
In 1904, Japan issued her first direct challenge to a Western power. In a territorial dispute over Port Arthur on the coast of mainland China, the Japanese army fought Imperial Russia for several months. It was one of the first wars to be recorded in moving pictures. On land, it was the Japanese who won. To save the day, Russia dispatched its Baltic fleet to the Far East. The fleet took 7 months to sail halfway round the globe, only to be wrecked in less than a day by Japanese warships. The world was impressed. Not for centuries had there been such a rapid rise to international power. There was special praise from Britain, whose alliance with Japan had been signed 2 years before. For the British had built the ships and trained the officers that defeated the Russians. Later, in the First World War, Japan fought on the side of the Allies, and in the victory celebrations in London, Japanese soldiers and sailors